Welcome back, everyone. It is Dirge, and for today, I have a very late the pre sequel review. I've never really officially put my thoughts out on this in one video. I think I've just talked about it here and there. So I thought I'd just make an actual video out of it because with this free weekend, there might be some people that are thinking about playing it who have never tried it before. And on YouTube, there's been some mixed or almost overly negative response to it. But when you go to like Steam reviews or other things, critic reviews, the reviews are very good. And kind of want to just put my thoughts on it. So to start off, the pre-sequel, if you're expecting Borderlands 3, you will be disappointed because it's not Borderlands 3. It was not meant to be Borderlands 3. It is Borderlands 2.5. Very much so. It runs on the same engine as Borderlands 2. It has the same base guns. It's just Borderlands 2 with a facelift. And some people said maybe it's an expansion. And maybe it should have been $40 and not $60. And maybe they have a point. But right now, it's not $60. You can get this thing dirt cheap, either as part of the collection, or the Handsome Collection that is, or on Steam. And for the value it is right now, I think it's a no-brainer. It is not as good as Borderlands 2. But almost no games are, so who cares? It's still great in my opinion. Like I said, on Steam, I think it's got an 80% positive review. Now that is after a lot of patches and fixes and all that, but hey, it's a damn good deal right now. And if you guys like the Borderlands franchise and you played 1 and 2 but you're put off on the pre-sequel, I say go and get it. What's new about it? Before I get into the good and bad, I want to talk about new. So, lasers are new. Lasers are really cool. They could have used some more tweaking. I don't think they're perfect by any means, but they're really awesome. So they are kind of like some other guns, but different. You have a massive ammo pool, and depending on the kind of gun, they take different amounts of ammo, which is a good concept, kind of like the shotgun barrel concept in Borderlands 2. The Hyperion ones are railguns, so they're like laser snipers. The TDR ones are like shotguns or splitters, multiple pellets per shot. Then you have the Molly ones, which are like SMGs, they're the beams. And then you have your dolls, which are more like assault rifles. And that's the laser category, so depending on the barrel, and you can mix and match parts, is how the gun shoots. So you can have a Hyperion body with a Molly 1 barrel that makes it a beam. Or a Hyperion body with a TDR, which makes it a shotgun. And all this is really good. They're really interesting. They feel different, although they're like other guns. The beams are what SMGs really should be, because they have limited range, they have really bad recoil, but they are insanely high DPS within that range, and they're just right in my opinion. I think the railguns were a bit of a miss, especially because they just don't have that same sniper crit, and then they don't get sniper bonuses from sniper characters, which that's something they can work on. But the big miss with me for lasers are there's really no accessories except a blade, and that's where they're kind of, some people say, half-baked because they didn't have the accessories worked in. But there were some other cool things, like Hyperion stocks give an extra 10% critical hit, which you don't get with other Hyperion stocks and normal guns. So there were interesting things, and they all have their different bonuses. Dolls have penetration. Molly 1 has continuous fire bonus, which is multiplicative, which is a big deal. Hyperion has extra critical hit, and TDR, when you throw them, they have a Tesla effect, which I think is very fitting. Probably the weakest among all the effects, though, sadly. Anyways, lasers are really cool, and I hope they keep them, and I hope they improve on them. Rather than kind of like E-Techs went away and Iridians went away, lasers have the potential to be really, really, really awesome if they kind of finish them. The next was low gravity. So you're on the moon, and there is lower gravity, so you can double jump, you can float and glide through air with your Oz kits. And this adds a lot, especially with the butt stomp as for combat. So when you're floating in air, you can hold down the jump button to slam down and do what they call a butt stomp. And that gives you an AoE of damage, and then it pushes enemies back. And it's a good way to kind of initiate combat, and it makes this a little more arcadey, which I think has always been kind of the goal for Borderlands. It's less ducking behind cover. Instead of going behind cover, you take to the air and slam down and use that as attacks. I really hope we keep this kind of thing. Maybe not low gravity, maybe double jumps in the future, but this definitely added to combat being better. It led you to be able to avoid bosses Nova's attacks, and it just explore more. Like, one thing that's great about Borderlands 2 is just exploring all the maps and looking all over the place, and getting those double jumps really helped. They did a great job of running out of oxygen wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't a total death sentence. You would just slowly lose some health, but it wasn't so much where it was the end of the world. So I think they dealt with it pretty good. And I don't know if I want low gravity back, depending on the environments we go to, but it'd be cool to see a little bit of it in the future games. But I hope they do keep the packs and allow us to do double jumps and spend more time in air, because I think that added a lot to the game and a lot to the combat. And I generally think combat in this game is better. Cryo. Cryo is the new debuff element. In Borderlands 1, it was corrosive. In Borderlands 2, it was slag. And slag and corrosive kind of acted the same. And then in Borderlands 3, it's cryo. So I think cryo is more interesting than the other ones, but it might be a little too strong. So when you get enemies with cryo, you can actually freeze them still, which is a big deal. Be able to just make enemies stationary, especially a lot of enemies stationary. But the bad part about it, well, making them stationary is just too strong, I think. Although interesting. You don't get all debuff on it. It's a debuff for melee, explosive, and critical hits. And the critical hits are pretty easy to get generally while they're frozen, which is great. But sometimes when they're frozen, their hitbox gets like misplaced in the animation, and you can't crit them, and that kind of sucks. But in general, I like it better, but I almost wish it was a slowdown and not an absolute freeze, because the absolute freeze is just, they said, almost a bit too strong, in my opinion. Although I do like it. I don't know. I'm really torn on cryo, like where I stand on it. Bosses really can't be cryo, but if they get the cryo dot on them, they still get the debuff. So an enemy doesn't have to be frozen to have the debuff. They just have to have a cryo dot on them. One of the other things fun, if you freeze an enemy in air and they fall to the ground, they typically shatter and die, which is just fun. But back to the low gravity, you have the Oz kits. And Oz kits are the new relics, and I really like what they did here, because now the relic spot does even more. So in Borderlands 1, it just added an element to your action skill. And even at that, there was only like 5 levels of them or something. It's not you could get a new one every level like you can with relics and stuff. In Borderlands 2, the relics really opened that up to what they could do. Gave a lot more diversity to builds and character selection. In Borderlands the Pre Sequel, now you have relic-like stats and abilities on them, but they also control your slam damage and your oxygen levels, which is cool. So now they're stat-wise as well. But they did a much better job with these with red text. And I'll kind of get back to that in a little bit later. The next thing is the grinder. So some people really hate the grinder. They say it takes away from farming. I love the grinder because it gives you an option to, kind of hold on to your crappy guns and do something with them, rather than just either not pick them up or just use them as vendor fodder. And if you don't like it, if you'd rather farm the bosses, just do that. Now some people say, oh, you can't farm bosses. You can now. They patched it. Get over it. That's been changed. So yeah, the grinder just adds another option. That's great. And you find legendaries that you didn't really want, instead of just tossing them away, you can use them in the grinder to try to get the legendary you do want. That's cool. I don't see any problem with it. I think it's just an improvement. It's another option. I hope it sticks around. Because, like I said, if you'd rather farm the bosses and not grind, you can. But if people would rather grind, they can. It answers both questions. There's also that argument of the grinder. Well, then you're not really fighting bosses. You're just looting things. Well, the Borderlands 1 people always just looted Nox's farmer anyways. That's just opening chests. I don't see how that's much different than the grinder. I mean, it's just checking for RNG. It's the same thing. Then the last really new addition that's a big deal is Loonshines. So in Borderlands 2, you had 2 accessory slots in the game codes, but they only used 1. In this one, there is a secondary accessory slot that you can be used for Loonshines, and that's very cool. Not much else to say on that. It just gives a little extra stat. They're usually not huge. The best one for a lot of people is just chance for penetration, which is good. But there's other good ones. Grenade damage boost, critical hit boost. They're all fairly small, but helpful. So what do I think they got better in the pre-sequel? To start off, scaling-wise, this is a mixed bag depending on who you are. But a lot of people complain that Borderlands 2 scaling was too aggressive and it made the game too hard. The pre-sequel lessened scaling, so they softened up the scaling a lot. So that argument of, all these guns aren't viable at endgame and UVHM ruined all these guns, the pre-sequel doesn't have that issue because they softened up the scaling. They also softened up UVHM, so no more enemy health regen. And instead of just a flat 4 times health multiplier, they put a lot of the multiplier into shields. And this is a good thing for the most part. But there's a failing in it. So what I like about it is, in Borderlands 2, enemy shields were all but pointless. And you could just blast through them anyway, so you never really had to worry about shock damage to get through the shield. You could just one-shot people with your fire or corrosive guns, or non-elemental, or whatever. Or explosive, anything, really. You rarely needed shock to beat the shields. In the pre-sequel, that's a little bit different. You want to concentrate more on that. And that's a great improvement. And now, on badasses, they got improved health and shields, and even more so, and they truly are badass, and I think this is good, rather than just flat scaling. The badasses get more badass, and that's awesome. The failing in this was non-shielded enemies are a joke. And most of the creatures are non-shielded, non-badass enemies, and they became a joke. Specifically Kragans, which I thought are really fun enemies to fight, but they just become tissue paper because they don't really scale up well outside the badass ones. And the fun thing about Kragans is, as you kill them, they multiply into smaller versions. You just have them everywhere. And if they got a little bit tougher, they would have been a hell of a lot fun to fight. But instead, you just kind of blast through them and don't really worry about it. So they need to do a little tweaking there, but for the most part, I think people thought this was a better take on UVHM. The next thing is probably the biggest deal of it is the skill trees are so much better. Leaps and bounds better. The characters in general just... There's far less bad skills. Borderlands 2 is littered with just bad skills on every character's skills that didn't make a lot of sense. And the pre-sequel has some of those, but far less. You get your skill points earlier at level 3 instead of 5. And Borderlands without skill points is kind of dumb, so that was a huge move. By the first boss fight, you have your action skill, which Borderlands 2 you did not. You barely got it by your second boss fight. Then they also, on your Game Changer tier, tier 3, you only need 1 point to get down. So you can get down the skill tree a lot faster as well, getting to 2 capstones. So at the end of True Vault Hunter mode at level 50, you can have 2 capstones. And I think this is a big improvement as well. The skills just go together better. You know, Athena's Maelstrom compared to Gage's Anarchy works a lot better in that skill tree. The capstones in general work a lot better. The skill trees are just much, much better designed, and the character design is way better. And there's just more kind of, I guess, synergy of what you can do with the skills and weapons combos than you could in Borderlands 2. Outside of Sal offhand stuff, which was kind of, you know, somewhat broken, we'll say. And that even the dual wielding, they did better with Nisha to avoid some of those issues. And there's just so many things they really improved on. You know, better elemental characters and better sniping characters and just kind of everything across the board when it comes to skill trees. Did way better. So this alone makes the pre-sequel worth playing. Just get a few characters leveled up, and although the game's not as good as Borderlands 2, the characters are so good it's definitely worth playing. I mean, I know a lot of people that like Borderlands pre-sequel better than Borderlands 2 because of this. The next is the character interaction. So your characters are actually part of the story. They interact with the story rather than just kind of the story being told around them, which makes for much better storytelling in general. You see characters take bigger arcs. Now, not everyone likes these arcs, but you see much more character development, not just from the NPCs, but also from playable characters and how they respond to the story. And that just makes the entire experience way better. Rather than just some generic lines made on combat. Vehicles, I think the vehicles were done better. I love the Stingrays, personal vehicles rather than, you know, multiple vehicles. And the fact that you can spawn them off of each other was also huge. So if yours dies and your friend's is alive, you can spawn one off of your friend rather than have to run all the way back to a car station, which is a better thing. Boss fights, I think, in this game are a lot better than Borderlands 2. Not raids, not talking about raid bosses, just talking about regular story bosses. Flame Knuckle, way better than Knuckle Dragger. Deadlift, better than Captain Flint. The Bosun, I guess, would be compared to maybe Wilhelm. The Sentinel, I think, is a lot better than the Warrior for an end boss fight. So I think just regular story bosses are much better in this game. They're more interesting fights. There's more mechanics to them. More stages on a lot of them. Even the DLC as well, which I'm mainly talking about the vanilla game here, but bosses were done much better. The last thing on my list of major improvements, and I probably missed some, but the vendor item of the days are actually good. And you often find purples and legendaries in there, where Borderlands 2 you would rarely even see a purple in there, making the vendors kind of pointless. But in this game, the vendors are a big deal. In fact, some people just vendor farm for legendaries. And for people that complained about that, a lot of you farm the armory, so fuck off. Which, actually, that had a secondary effect to it, which made currency more valuable. In Borderlands 2, money didn't matter. You could just gain it so quick, pick up a couple of guns, sell them, you're back up to good money. Enough to, you know, keep up with ammo. But you never really needed it beyond buying ammo. At the end game, you barely even needed to do that because ammo dropped so heavily. So money really became pointless. And in the pre-sequel, you definitely want to keep money on hand because you will find a lot of stuff you want to buy, kind of like in Borderlands 1. And that's a big, big improvement, is actually having currency worth of value. I guess one more thing I forgot to write down, though, is they gave more uses for moonstones, which is like iridium from Borderlands 2. In Borderlands 2, you know, you collected iridium, and originally you could just use it to buy your upgrades, and that was it. And the DLCs helped a little bit with that, and be able to fight raids, but even that was kind of pointless because you get so much more back. It was kind of dumb. In this one, the Moonstones, you can actually use them for the grinder. You can use them to open Moonstone chests to get better loot. So there's much more value in those as well. So on to the failings. What brought it down? So the game is shorter and smaller. And I hate to even bring that up as a failing because Borderlands 2 was up front, or Gearbox was up front about that. But it is part of it. It is a smaller game. The story is shorter. There's less maps. Sorry, cold. There's just kind of less of everything. The entire game is just smaller. But that's not the end of the world because the game, while there, is pretty good. This next one is my biggest pet peeve of the game is the mob density. Mobs in this game disappear way faster and there's fewer of them. And one of the best things about Borderlands 2 is just there's so many good maps that you can just run over and over again. Bloodshot, and Southpaw, and obviously I run those a lot, but in the DLCs there's a ton. And the mobs are thick and they respawn pretty often. The Eagle's Nest and the Dust is a great spot. There's so many awesome places to go and just fight. And you can just go and pick a map and run it with friends and have a good time. There's not a lot of these in the pre-sequel. And you get a wave of enemies, and the waves are smaller. Where Borderlands 2, the wave might be, 15 enemies. It seems like the pre-sequel, it's like 3 or 4. You kill one, another one comes, and there's like 2 waves, and they're done. Where Borderlands 3, it seems like or Borderlands 2, there's more enemies, more waves, just more dense amount of enemies. And then to go with that, it's less enemy variety. So there is... Basically, we're missing the entire loaders category in this. There is really just scavs. And even with the scavs, you don't have the Goliaths. You have less buzzard-type enemies flying around. You don't really have the evolving enemies. Even the wildlife, there's less variation in the wildlife, and there's less enemy variety, which doesn't help the mob density either. There's less red text guns by quite a bit, and quite a few of them are brought back from Borderlands 2. Some of them, even with new names, they still existed in Borderlands 2, like the Razorback. They just gave a new name. Which, part of the fun of these Borderlands games was discovering everything. Borderlands 1, obviously, it was all new. But in Borderlands 2 it was all new again because they totally revamped the gun system. So we had to learn everything. And then with every DLC, you got so many more guns. In this game, you already knew all the base guns. We got to learn lasers, which was fun. But other than that, there really wasn't anything new. I guess old Hyperion, but that wasn't that exciting. Or good, because they screwed up the matching parts. So there's a loss of that, and then just the lack of new red text guns was kind of sad. And led to a lot less discovery and a lot less kind of excitement. Now, they did improve some of them, like Skullmasher got better, the Flacker got better, but it wasn't that exciting as finding new guns and finding out how to use them. My next point is the scaling. I like hard scaling, so for the people like me that love OP8, there are no OP levels, so that's a bit of a sad day. I have to just say it, when they launched the game, most of the bosses weren't respawnable, so you couldn't farm them. They fixed that, so moving on. Map design in this, people go after the environments. They say it's all gray, you're just on the moon all the time. Borderlands 1 was all brown, and people loved it. But, it's not the environments I have an issue with, it's the map design. Very few maps are circular, and this goes to the good mobbing maps. Southpaw was a circle. Bloodshot wasn't a circle, but you start and end at a fast travel, so it kind of works like a circle. But Frostburn was a circle, and so many of these Borderlands 2 maps were either like circles or infinity symbols, or they wrapped back into each other. Wildlife Preserve. I think there was only really one map that did that in the pre-sequel. And it wasn't even a great one. It kind of brought you back, but not all the way. So that's the problem with a lot of that map design. Where Borderlands 2 just had it better. To sidetrack a little bit into the environments, I actually really like the environmental changes in this better than Borderlands 2. So Borderlands 1 was all brown, and that was a big kind of hit on it by a lot of people. They complained it was just very one note. So in Borderlands 2, it's like, oh, you start off in the snow, and this is a big new thing, and then you kind of go into some green, and then you go into some lava areas. But all those outdoor areas, if it was snow or green or lava, it was kind of the same. Where the pre-sequel, by changing the gravity, was actually a bigger change in environmental factors of how you actually fought. So when you went from outside into the vein of Helios, or not the vein of Helios, the Hyperion hub of heroism, all of a sudden you're indoors and you don't have low gravity, and it's a very different thing, and it looks different. So the combat actually feels different and is different. And then when you go into the veins of Helios and you're in like outer space, no longer on the surface with low gravity again, but wide open spaces, that's very different on how you go after that map. So I actually think environmental differences they did a little bit better, but map design they did worse. And that kind of leads into endgame content. This game has a lot less endgame content. Because you don't have those really good mobbing runs, you don't really have raid bosses in this one. The one raid boss we got was the same as the end boss with scaled up health, which, was pretty cheap. Then we didn't get the same amount of story DLCs, which all came with raid bosses. And again, the quote-unquote raid boss of the Claptrap DLC was also, the end boss, but that was a great fight. It could be better than any of the Borderlands 2 raids, actually. But, again, that was just kind of a failing in the in-game content. We had one arena in this one, where Borderlands 2, you had 3 arenas in the vanilla game. You had the Bandit, the Loader Hyperion one, and the Wildlife one. This one just had the doll shock drop, and you had to buy it or get it as a bonus when you bought the game, and it wasn't repeatable. And we thought they learned their lesson with repeatable arenas, because they did it in Tiny Tina's, they did it in Torg's. The fact that they didn't make it repeatable, I think, was a huge miss, and just part of that endgame miss. So the pre-sequel does not have as good of endgame as Borderlands 2. It's shorter than Borderlands 2, but the journey is so good. The characters are so good. It's not as exciting as playing Borderlands 2 for the first time, because chances are if you're watching this, you've played a lot of Borderlands 2. So rather than being so new, it's going to be a lot of familiar. And that can be good or bad depending on how you're looking at it. But if you really get into the characters and really get into the synergies and the builds of it, you might like it better than Borderlands 2. So don't listen to all those naysayers that just kind of shit on the game when it first came out, because they were expecting the same kind of jump from Borderlands 1 to Borderlands 2. This was never supposed to be that. This is still, in my opinion, a great video game. It's not as great as Borderlands 2, but I still consider it a great game. It's not perfect. It has its faults. People call it buggy, but to this day, Borderlands 1 is way buggier than this game, so I don't buy into that too much. But that's it. I think I've talked long enough on this. If you like Borderlands and you haven't played this, give it a shot. It's so cheap right now. If you're on Xbox, just try it for this weekend, see what you think. if you're on Steam or PlayStation. If you're on PlayStation, you should have the Handsome Collection. If you haven't turned this on yet and started playing it, just play it. If you're on Steam, you can probably buy this for like $5 or $10. So just buy it, because it's totally worth that. But anyways, my cold is definitely kicking up now, and I have got to end this. So thanks again for watching. I hope you appreciate it. Wait, I appreciate it. See, my cold's all getting fucked up to me. But come follow me on Twitter. Comment on what you think about the pre-sequel below. But don't be a dick and just say it sucks. If you say it sucks, give me some reasoning. Give us some context. I started a Patreon that I talked about in my video the other day that's going to allow me to do some new things on here and potentially motivate me to stream. So please sign up for that if you can give anything, even $1. I will appreciate that. And I have my Facebook page, so come find me on there, and that's so much stuff to talk about. So anyways, thank you once again. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all later. Bye.